Coming up on Arirang News, the South Korean economy shrank in the first quarter by the most since the financial crisis in 2008, down by 1.4% as the coronavirus outbreak took its toll. The government announces another support package worth some $69 billion for the South Korean aviation, auto, and shipbuilding sectors. And a project to connect South Korea's railways to the north is set to pick up speed, with Seoul having given it an exemption to the usual feasibility studies. It's 5 p.m. here in Seoul. Thanks for joining us on Arirang News. I'm Devin Whiting. A project to connect South and North Korea by rail has been given a legal exemption by the South Korean government that should speed up its construction. Namely, there won't have to be a preliminary feasibility study. The Inter-Korean Exchange and Cooperation Promotion Council decided Thursday to recognize it as part of an Inter-Korean Exchange and Cooperation project, meaning the feasibility study is waived. The railway will be on South Korea's east coast, running from the city of Gangneung to Jeojin, which is near the North Korean border. Connecting the two sides by rail was part of the agreement struck 2 years ago by President Moon Jae-in and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. But progress is stalled along with the nuclear talks between the North and the U.S. The South Korean government has announced tougher measures to crack down on digital sex crimes. The measures include punishing the offenders more harshly and revealing their identities, and doing more to protect the victims. Kim Mo-kyun reports.
The South Korean government laid down new measures aimed at eradicating digital sex crimes after shock over a recent sexual exploitation case centered on online group chat rooms. During a joint briefing at the Prime Minister's office on Thursday, No Hyung-wook, chief of the Office for Government Policy Coordination, said that 9 related ministries created a joint task force with industry experts to come up with the measures. The government will strengthen punishments for people who sell materials related to digital sex crimes and create punishments for companies that promote those materials online. Authorities will also punish people of conspiracy if they have been caught planning to rape minors. The government will also adopt a new system where prosecutors can file for the confiscation of the money earned through such crimes even before indicting the criminal. Authorities will actively reveal the personal information of not only criminals who sexually abuse children and teens, but also those who created and sold related materials. And as part of efforts to strengthen the protection of minors, the government will raise the threshold for negligent rape crimes to children to those under 16 years old from the current 13. A platform where citizens can be rewarded for reporting illegal sexual materials will also be created to get better track of the buying and selling of such materials. Also, people who own illegal digital sexual materials will be punished, and those who are caught in possession will not be able to be employed in schools and kindergartens. On support measures for the victims, the government vowed to work around the clock to help delete sexually exploitative materials and create a support center under the Ministry of Gender Equality and Family to help in the counseling of the victims. The government also vowed to make necessary legal amendments in cooperation with the National Assembly to root out digital sex crimes. Kim Mo-kyun, Arirang News.
The city of Seoul is showing its appreciation for the medical workers battling COVID-19 by turning the capital's landmarks blue. A total of 26 public and private buildings have been lit up in blue at night since last Thursday. The landmarks include Seoul City Hall, the Han River Bridges, and Seoul Tower, also known as Namsan Tower. The Blue Light campaign will continue through May 15th. In the first quarter of this year, because of the coronavirus pandemic, South Korea posted its biggest economic contraction since the 2008 global financial crisis. Consumption was decimated in the first quarter, forcing an untold number of businesses to close. Yoon Jung-min reports.
South Korea's economy has suffered its biggest drop in over 11 years, a hit not seen since the fourth quarter of 2008, when the world economy was reeling from the global financial crisis. The Bank of Korea revealed Thursday that South Korea's preliminary first quarter GDP growth was down 1.4% from the previous quarter. On year, the country's GDP edged up 1.3%, but that's also the lowest growth in around a decade. Private consumption fell 6.4% as goods and services were hammered by the COVID-19 outbreak. Growth for South Korea's wholesale, retail, food, and accommodation sectors fell over 6%, while transportation plunged over 12%.
The contribution of domestic consumption to growth turned sharply negative. Its contribution plunged to minus 2 percentage points from the previous quarter's 1.4 percentage points.
Government spending edged up 0.9%. Construction investment expanded 1.3%, while facilities investment was up 0.2%. South Korea's exports were down 2%, due mainly to lower shipments of automobiles, machinery, and chemical products. However, semiconductor exports were up. Imports dropped over 4%, due mostly to cheaper oil and fewer imported cars coming into the country. South Korea's economic difficulties can be seen in Fitch Ratings' GDP growth projections for this year, which have been lowered from minus 0.2% to the new projection of minus 1.2%.
Even optimists expect this year's growth to be similar to the level seen during the 2008 global financial crisis, while pessimists expect the growth to be as low as during the Asian financial crisis.
On the same day, South Korea's Finance Minister Hong Nam-gi said there is a rising possibility the real economy and job market experience shocks during and after the second quarter due to the worsening global recession. Hong said a recovery in investment and exports since the end of last year somewhat cushioned a sharp decline for South Korea's GDP growth in the first quarter. He added the government will do its utmost to ensure domestic consumption and exports pick up in the second half, despite looming downside risks. The Finance Ministry will focus on boosting South Korea's job numbers in April and May. Then in June, the government will announce its economic policies for the second half of the year. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
The South Korean government on Wednesday announced another $69 billion to stabilize key industries and save people's jobs. Now, it's laid out how the funds will be used, specifically targeting the aviation, auto, and shipbuilding sectors. Kim Da-mi has the details.
With travel on hold due to the coronavirus, local airlines are facing a meltdown. The number of airport passengers during the second week of April nosedived by over 98% compared to the same period of the previous year. To make sure the local aviation industry survives the pandemic, the South Korean government will use some of the $69 billion COVID-19 support package laid out on Wednesday to help Korean Air and Asiana Airlines. This is the first time that the government has proposed COVID-19 support funds for large airlines. At an emergency meeting on Thursday, Finance Minister Hong Nam-gi also said the government is reviewing additional liquidity measures for low-cost carriers on top of the roughly $250 million it announced for this sector in February. It will also postpone payments for airport facility fees from May until August.
Over 90% of international air routes have been suspended due to COVID-19. The government's liquidity support and funds are expected to take some of the burden off local airlines.
The auto industry has not been forgotten either. Over the next month, the government will pay up to 70% of down payments in advance for the roughly 8,700 vehicles that it plans to purchase this year. In addition, it will provide subsidies for purchases of 5,500 electric cargo trucks. To revive the country's shipbuilding industry, the government has also pledged to keep issuing refund guarantees to help local shipbuilders win overseas contracts. The government also plans to create a task force for industries and businesses and has pledged to swiftly solve any problems that occur. Kim Da-mi, Arirang News.
Time now for an in-depth look at the market news this afternoon, and for that I'm joined on the line by Dr. Kim Se-won, Professor of Economics at Ewha Women's University. Professor Kim, thank you for coming on today.
Good afternoon, Devin.
Well, oil prices have regained some ground, though it seems things could still be quite volatile. Why this rebound, and do you think it'll last?
Well, it looks to me that Mr. Trump's aggressive warnings on Iranian military ship was a temporarily factor to recover oil price. If there is a military conflict between U.S. and Iran, shippings of oils are in danger, which is a positive factor for oil price. But it takes more time, I think, to recover oil demand and price because fundamental factors like quarantine is still going on and no more oil storage available are dominating the oil market.
Right. Well, after the hit the stocks on Wall Street took earlier this week on the oil issue, they were back up on Wednesday. All three main indexes gaining in the 2% range. Take us through the global markets.
Oil price up has built Wednesday's U.S. stock market rebound, and this momentum was transmitted to European markets yesterday and this morning. S&P 500 return in U.S. gained 2.3% on Wednesday's market, and European markets also had positive daily returns in UK, France, Germany, between 1 to 2% level in a day.
Yeah, there were signs of a recovery in the Korean markets as well. The Kospi up by around 1% for the third day in a row, and Kosdaq up even a little bit more than that. What's the story in local stocks?
In today's domestic market, Kospi has gained about 1%, and Kosdaq also had a positive return by 1.4%. Rising oil price and government's emergency package became positive factors in today's market. One thing particular in today's market is domestic individual investors and foreign investors sold domestic stocks. But on the other side, domestic institutional investors like banks and insurance companies bought domestic stocks.
Right. Well, now we have this big story today. The Korean economy, we know now that it shrank 1.4% in the first quarter. It's expected that the real impact, though, of the coronavirus will show up in the second quarter. So talk a little bit about what's being done and what might be done.
Bank of Korea released Korea's first quarter's economic growth this morning, and it was, as you said, negative 1.4%. And it is one of the worst economic growth in a decade. And one thing really scary is that COVID-19's effect on the economy is not fully reflected in first quarter's economic growth. So there is a possibility that we will see worse economic growth in second and third quarters. So government's response to COVID shock should be prompt and aggressive expansionary and monetary and fiscal policies.
Yeah, and speaking of those kind of policies, there was the emergency relief package yesterday in the form of a third extra budget. Again, the concern, though, is that it's been there all along, which is the government's fiscal soundness. What do you say to that?
Since government has decided to go to a supplementary budget to finance emergency packages of governments, concerns on government debt is rising again. But we need to reconstruct economic policy target priority under this emergency situation. So it is necessary to place a higher priority on expansionary fiscal policy than restraining government debt increase.
Got it. Well, we'll watch how those policies develop, whichever direction they go. Thank you, Professor Kim, for your insights today.
Thank you very much.
Now, profits at South Korean automaker Hyundai Motor plunged in the first quarter by more than 40% on year as COVID-19 hit demand for cars globally. Hyundai's net profit for January to March was $449 million US, down about 42% from a year earlier. Sales and operating profit were up 5.6% and 4.7% respectively, but analysts say those gains came from the weaker Korean won. Meanwhile, South Korean chipmaker SK Hynix saw operating profit come in at $650 million, also down about 41% on year. That, however, was better than expected, according to analysts, as sales of server products offset lower demand for mobile devices. The city of Seoul announced today that it'll be paying COVID-19 hardship relief funds in the coming months to the city's small business owners. It's set aside 574 billion won, or around $500 million US. Small business owners registered in the city will each get 2 monthly payments of 700,000 won for a total of 1.4 million won, or around $1,100 in total. To be eligible, a business has to have been open for 6 months prior to the end of February, and it needs to still be in operation. Also, last year's revenue has to have been 200 million won or less. There are around 410,000 businesses that qualify. Applications will be accepted online from mid-May and offline from June. That brings us to the end of this newscast. Thank you for watching. More live news coming your way at 7 p.m. Korea time.